Welcome to Superhero Pow. I'm your host nerd, Tom Frumgen. Everybody likes to guess at what George Lucas was going to do with the Star Wars sequel, especially since Disney's, and I say Disney not to hurt any one person's feelings, were so, what's the word? Oh yeah, bad. Now, instead of just going over the rumors and tidbits George has let slip out over the years, I'm going to try to tie them all together and come up with a coherent premise or goal of the sequels. To do this, unfortunately, we have to start at the beginning. What was George thinking? Well, unable to get the rights to Flash Gordon, George Lucas drew from the greatest space opera stories ever told to create his own, mixing in a healthy dose of samurai movies and Joseph Campbell theory. The result was The Star Wars, an epic far too big to film. With some help, he worked the story down and picked the best point in the narrative to make a single movie of. Of course, he hoped for more, but he had to be realistic. Heck, even when he found a studio, it wasn't because Alan Ladd Jr. believed in Star Wars, it was because he wanted George, and paying for this pet project seemed like a good way to get him. Either way, George went with the fourth act, the real meat of the story, if you will. And it worked. George soon started talking about doing all 9 movies to tell the whole The Star Wars adventure. But when fandom became too insatiable and rabid, he toned down his talk and swore there were only 3. Ha! And there is the villain of this story, the fans. The intense passion and scrutiny of the fans froze George Lucas's creative heart to its core. You see, I'm not so sure a lot of fans understand this, but despite having more money than God, George Lucas is just like every other nerdy creative soul. He's needy and shy. As a general rule, confident and outgoing people don't write fiction. They have embraced life experiences for what it is, while the needy and shy dream of worlds where they can be confident and outgoing, and so they create them. Therefore, if you yell, kick, scream, and criticize creative souls, they usually say "f*** it" and walk away. Or at least sell it all to Disney. Now, this is not to say that George Lucas is infallible or God's gift to science fiction or anything like that. I'm merely trying to explain the situation, because as we all know, for better or worse, George has caved to the fans many times and has hid from the fans many times. But getting back to George's plan, the reason why you clicked this video, I think it's fairly clear he was not creating space fantasy. He was basing his story more off of works like Lensman, Dune, and The Foundation, as opposed to John Carter. He was writing science fiction, not science fantasy. Fun space opera, to be sure, but it was meant to be more than just good is good and evil is bad. Hence the healthy dose of Joseph Campbell. And the reveal of midichlorians totally proves this. But when the space fantasy children's franchise was revealed to be not George's intention at all, the fans were outraged. He's ruining Star Wars. Somehow they had forgotten that they had only seen 3 chapters of a 9-chapter story. And George wasn't just making this up on the fly, this was all planned out years ago. With a fair amount of wiggle room, mind you. Now let's really hammer this point home. Star Wars is not a children's movie. At no point had George Lucas ever say when he was writing the Star Wars and making A New Hope that he was making a children's movie. Star Wars is as much as a children's film as the Indiana Jones films are. And I ask you, what makes Indiana Jones for adults and Star Wars for kids? Nothing. They are virtually the same in action, dialogue, and morality. Heck, I'd even say the themes in Star Wars are more mature than the ones in Indiana Jones. So where does the kids' movie line come from? Again, viewing Lucas as a shy, needy creator, you can see calling it a children's movie was merely a defense mechanism to protect him from critics. Why would you write something so stupid? Well, it's a kids' movie. This is really dumb. Well, it's a kids' movie. So again I say, Star Wars was not meant to be a kids' movie, nor was it meant to be space fantasy. With that established, we can finally see where George was taking Star Wars in its final chapters. Talking chronologically, in the prequels, it started with the Force everywhere, Everyone accepted it, and for the most part, everybody understood it, midichlorians and all. Then in the original trilogy, it was forgotten. The Force was nowhere, and no one knew anything about it. So where does the Force go next in the sequels? Well, we may never know. But one main thing George has said about the sequels is that it was to be about the Wills and their micro-world, and the Wills were to be the creators of the Force. George then followed it up with, the fans would have hated it, so he said fuck it and sold it all to Disney, who in turn did what they do best, repackaged what came before and sell it over and over and over again. And some fans ate it up. They got what they wanted, continuing space fantasy adventures. But other fans, who were actually more into the story and George's vision, warts and all, were left very unhappy because they never got the end of the story. But clearly the Force was meant to be the focus of the final Star Wars trilogy, how and why it was created, what was the goal of the Wills in creating midichlorians and giving it to people, and what were their thoughts on what people did with it. Republics, empires, Jedi, Sith? Then of course there's Anakin Skywalker's birth. Remember, George never explained how he came to be. Again, I think it's pretty clear the Wills had something to do with it. Using Dune and Lensman as a guide, genetic manipulation of a hero's lineage was a big theme. So surely the sequels were going to tell us how it all came to be. Pushing further, based on other notes, like Luke becoming disillusioned and not rebuilding the Jedi, I wouldn't be surprised if it was going to reveal there isn't a dark side or a light side of the Force. Those were just concepts people put on it to explain and to excuse their own actions. Then with all those questions answered, the big question would come into play. What do the Wills do now? Would they strip the Force from the universe? Did civilization get its tool before they were ready? Or would the heroes of the story, clearly meant to be the grandchildren of Darth Vader, because again, look at what came before, Anakin Skywalker, Luke Skywalker, clearly the sequels were going to focus on another Skywalker kid. And would they transcend with their interaction with the Wills and move civilization towards a great awakening of some sort? In the previous 6 movies, we've seen the result of the Force in the galaxy. The last 3 surely were going to give us some conclusion based on those events. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, the villain of this story, the fans, robbed us and George of that conclusion. Now I'll add that this would all be the subtext of the films. The main plot, just as with the previous films, would have been another Star War, which would again change the political power and system of the galaxy. As we went from Republic to Empire, and Empire to, well, we're not sure. There's no guarantee the Republic would have returned after the defeat of the Empire. I hazard a guess that the galaxy would have fallen into a state of chaos, or a collection of confederations, but probably wouldn't have formed a unified government again. Then after the third great Star War in the sequels, be transformed again. There you have it. That's what the sequels surely would have been about. Maybe one day George will release his final sequel outline to the public, so we'll know for sure. And while I'm guilty of a fair amount of dumping on poor, well, super rich George for the prequels, I at least respected his story. Therefore, I for one am saddened to never see a proper ending to it all, as this was the sci-fi, nay, fiction, of our generation. That all said, thanks for spending some time with me. I hope you've had as much fun wondering about all this as I have. And as always, I value your input, so please comment, like, and subscribe, because I want to sell all your personal data to Facebook. Wait, did I just say that out loud?